Right, let's get into our second big story. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria's gross domestic product shrunk steadily by 2.24% for the third quarter of 2016. And according to data released by the Statistics Office, the fall was due to the current economic hardship plaguing the nation, with businesses struggling to access foreign exchange and rebels bombing oil pipelines in the restive southern region of Nigeria.
And the report stated that Nigeria's third quarter 2016 real GDP shrunk by 2.24% year-on-year, relative to a shrinking by 2.06% and 0.36% year-on-year recorded in the second quarter and first quarter 2016, respectively. Now, Nigeria's economy officially entered recession after the second quarter of 2016, largely due to negative growth in August. And the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, Godwin Emefiele, and Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, had projected that the economy would begin the process of recovery in the third quarter of this year, a situation that is yet to play out. Our guests in the studio already, Johnson Chukwu, he's a financial analyst, and we'll be looking at this. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. It's good to have you.
Good morning, Johnson. Good morning. Now, recession, when we heard government officials, the Minister of Finance at the time, the Minister of Budget and Planning saying there's hope and we can see light at the end of the tunnel, Nigeria is already getting out of recession technically and all of that. But now, from the Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria's recession is even deepening. How do we reconcile statements from government officials who are supposed to be the custodian of the economy and information like this?
Well, if you recall, we discussed it at one of your meetings. And I'd say that government agents should be harbingers of good news, of positive news. They cannot, by the nature of the responsibility they have, come and tell us it's all out doom and gloom. And they have a duty to try to stimulate confidence. But like I also said that day, that I do not see the fundamentals that they obviously are referring to, because the fundamentals do not indicate that the country will come out of recession in the third quarter. And the figures have shown it. But the basic thing is this. My challenge is actually that I need to see concerted efforts to bring Nigeria out of recession. That is still not there. The best we can see today are in the realms of faith. We're going to come out of it, and yes, we could come out of it by the activities of nature. Nature in the sense that, look, agriculture accounts for almost 1/3 of our GDP today, and then we are seeing improvement in agriculture. Of course, we also have to relate that with what they are doing in respect to agriculture. But most importantly, what will drive Nigeria out of recession will be a recovery in oil price. Unfortunately for us, the aspect that is within us, what is endogenous to us, which is the production, we're not handling it.
But is that really what will bring Nigeria out of recession? I mean, we've been blaming the slump in oil price, the dwindling revenue as the reasons for, this recession in the first place. Is it not because of failure to actually diversify our revenue sources? Is that not what the real challenge is? And so that even when oil, spikes tomorrow, we might still find ourselves in the same situation.
Well, the way I would look at it, we have structural challenges in the economy, which will take some time to address. But that is not all the story is. If we decompose the figures we saw in the third quarter, you saw that the major dip in the GDP came from oil production. Oil production dropped from 2.17 million barrels per day to 1.63 million barrels per day. And therefore, we saw a shrinkage in the oil and gas sector by 22.1%. Okay, remember the oil and gas sector accounts for 8.19% of the GDP.
See, I do understand that, but I asked that question as a fundamental here. If, say, for example, an ideal situation, if we had different, sources of revenue in the first place, and whether oil took a dip to $1 a barrel, Nigeria may not really have been affected in that kind of way. That's the reason for my question.
Yes, but like I said, that's not always this. whole story. And why I always say yes and not always the whole story is this. What has happened in the past is in the past. If we whine and cry and whatever, we're not going to reverse what has happened in the past. It's our duty as a country to restructure the economy. And that's why I said I'm looking for that comprehensive economic plan that will show how we're going to restructure the economy and redirect our productive activities. And that I understand the government is working on. We need to see that when they publish it. But the key thing is not that our economy should have been a more balanced economy where oil accounts for 2% of our GDP and accounts for 10% of our foreign exchange earnings. That is ideal, but that's not where we are. But the key thing is that we shouldn't be frozen where we are. We have a duty as a people to restructure our economy. And it will restructure our economy by the policy choices we make. One of those policy choices, you know, that we today we should be extolling is the issue of supporting agriculture. But I must also sound a caveat. Agriculture growth will help us reduce our import bills and make us food independent or food autonomous. It's not likely going to lead to industrialization of this country. So we must position agriculture where it belongs to. We must achieve food sufficiency. We must reduce the extraordinarily high incidence of poverty in the country by making food available to a lot of people, by giving opportunity for those artisans to feed themselves. But we must also focus on those sectors that will lead to industrialization of this country, that will create jobs for the majority of Nigerians.
All right, now, they say, you economists say that where we are now, what Nigeria is experiencing is part of what they call stagflation. Now, they talk about inflation and cost of products going high and all of that. Government, we just finished discussing the 200,000 jobs that government is about to create. That is going to mean a lot of money is going to be sent into the system. There is also the issue of liquidity, excess liquidity in the system. Now, there's a call to stimulate the economy. When you have too much liquidity in the system and you're talking about stagflation the way it is right now, isn't that too complicated to get us out of the recession we are talking about?
Okay, I'll try to break it down to the basics.
Please.
In the first place, when you talk of stagflation, you are referring to a situation where there's high unemployment, there is slow growth, or in the case of a recession, at the same time you have high inflation. Inflation is normally triggered by pressure, liquidity pressure, when there's so much liquidity in the economy, and then what we say in common parlance that
too much money chasing
few goods. But in our classical case, we do not have liquidity overhang. We actually have severe liquidity constraints, and that has been a dampener to recovery. The inflation we have today is basically structurally driven. It's what we call cost push, because of the pass-through effect of devaluation of naira on general price levels. So we've seen the uptick in inflation, and that is not driven by liquidity overhang. So you cannot fight the inflation that is cost-driven by sucking up liquidity from the banking system, because when you do that, you actually further constrain the capacity of the economy to recover on its own. And I give you, looking at the figures we had published by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, there are 4 sectors that grew. Banking industry, 2.64%, agriculture, 4.54%, communication, ICT, 1.1%, and professional services. Of those sectors, the sector you could actually say that enjoyed some stimulus is the agricultural sector. We have what the central bank called the Anchor Borrowers Program, where they're injecting liquidity into the economy through farmers who are borrowing at sub 10%. And that has led to a lot of improvement in crop production. That improvement in crop production is why you're seeing agriculture recovering by 4.54%. It then means, but look at the manufacturing sector. It shrunk by 4.3%. Look at the construction industry, it shrank. Look at the real estate industry, it shrank. These are the sectors that
those are the key
major employers of labor. Why is agriculture growing? Now, let's do something hypothetically. take out the 9% that they're enjoying from Anchor Borrowers Program and replace it with 5% or 30% borrowing rate. The entire agricultural sector will collapse. So it then means, I mean, we can arrive at the deduction that
artificial?
If you inject liquidity at appropriate pricing to any sector of this economy, the sector is likely going to recover. If you deprive sectors of liquidity, the sector will find it difficult to recover.
We'll come back to understanding this. Let's go on a break briefly and then we come back. But don't forget that top of the hour will be time for the news update, and Ndia Mugo will take us there at that time. Stay with us on the program. All right, thanks for staying with us on TVC Breakfast. We're discussing recession in Nigeria. And from the reports from the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, recession is deepening. But we heard from government officials that there is hope and things are getting better. But the statistics show that it is otherwise.
As a matter of fact, Mike, they say the worst is over and we're coming out of it already.
We can see light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
Yeah, there's hope for Nigeria, you know. So, you know, that's a way of giving everybody that hope. But
how do you juxtapose that with the FG saying come January, there might be famine?
You know, these are the complex social issues that govern or surround Nigeria. And that's why a lot of people are very confused. Because government, like, you know, we're talking, Johnson was talking about, there's a responsibility on the shoulders of government officials to give hope to the people and all of that. But when you're giving hope and statistics counters what you were saying,
totally different thing.
Exactly. Then you begin to see. Now let's
bring in
Foladele here to give us a perspective of Nigeria's reactions on this issue. Fola, good morning.
Good morning, Ngozi. Good morning, Johnson.
What are the people saying?
Ngozi, this is an interesting
A big recession behind you.
Yes.
It's taken away.
But this is, I don't know if it's called interesting or funny or weird, because we were talking about this earlier, how people are traveling, and not just to Abuja or Kano, but to Maldives, to Bahamas, you know.
I think it's just the Nigerian thing, because Nigerians at the peak of what you call the worst situation, they're just laughing.
We must still enjoy it. And there is a part in the Bible that says, in famine and hunger you shall laugh.
You shall laugh.
So maybe that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
Bible student.
All right, let's see what they're really saying about this one. Okay, Oil in the Brand says, the way Nigeria economy is going, a rise will be a history in Nigeria's diary. Rice now 29K, Nigeria recession. Next one, from Steady and Ready, says, recession or corruption, hashtag Nigeria, hashtag economy. Perhaps the possible ways you can interpret that, maybe he's asking that we might need to pick one, the fight against corruption or to be in a recession, who knows? Okay, Chinwe OGU says, hashtag economic change, provoking innovation everywhere, good stuff, hashtag Nigeria, hashtag economy, hashtag recession, hashtag innovation. M. Itorobasi says, recession is eating deep in Nigeria, on Nigeria economy. Oh Lord, we need a divine turnaround. Amen. Okay, Obashala Musan says, I'm yet to see anybody in government that says, don't pay me salary or any allowance because Nigerian economy is in recession. And the last one here from Freeman239, he says, Nigeria is not in recession, but in a transition from natural resources to creative resources. My thought, anyway. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, because you know Nigerians can be very creative when the situations
we're not praying,
are bad.
we're looking on the bright side.
Oh my God.
But Johnson, we were talking about Christmas earlier with Ngozi and Mike before you came in. And I just want to know, what do you think Christmas is going to look like this year? Do you think it's such a big part of our culture that we're still going to find a way to spend? We're still going to, maybe we've set some money aside just for Christmas. What do you make of that? What do you think is going to happen this Christmas?
I think my feel on the streets of Lagos is that things are really tough. Most families would find it difficult to celebrate Christmas the way they used to. We're going to see a very damp and low Christmas this year. People are struggling to pay school fees. People are struggling to pay rent. People are struggling to meet the basic needs of life, food, clothing, shelter. So in as much as Nigerians like the celebration of Christmas, but I think the economic condition today has really depressed their excitement about a lot of things. So in effect, you're going to see a very you did mention somebody said rice is 29 naira,
Yeah.
29,000.
Naira,
And if you remember, rice is the most stable food people eat during Christmas. But the basic thing is this: we may, in the medium to long term, see a reduction in the price of rice because we've seen a lot of resources going into that. But that will just be one of the food elements in the food basket of families and in the cost of living of families. So it will have very little effect. But give and take, people should give their allowance for a rough ride during this Yuletide.
Maybe we'll have Christmas bread or beans. But even bread is more expensive now.
Yeah, bread is getting a little more expensive. You remember we had the we
talked about bread.
We talked about bread sometime.
Yes,
and
and how it's getting out,
All
beyond
right.
the reach of the ordinary man.
All right, Fola.
Fola,
Thank you
so
very much.
As
Thank you.
usual.
Yeah, pleasure.
All right, Johnson. Let's get it on this way. Earlier, when you were talking, you said that you've not seen deliberate strategies by government as a way of trying to get us out of, or get the country out of recession. If we have to pinpoint or itemize those strategies, what do you expect to see, really?
Okay. There are three elements that are critical for Nigeria to come out of the recession. One is injecting liquidity into the local economy, local currency liquidity into the economy, so as to, at a lower cost, so as to stimulate recovery in the manufacturing sector, construction industry, real estate sector, and a couple of other sectors. Two, injecting foreign currency liquidity into the economy, so that manufacturers and other people that need basic imports to continue with their business engagements will have access to dollar. And three, improving on the production of crude in the country, such that we can go back, we can improve our foreign exchange earnings, and then improve dollar liquidity, and that will come from addressing the militancy in the Niger Delta. And if you ask me, I think the government has not recognized the fact that the elders, the so-called elders in the Niger Delta they seem to be speaking with, do not have overbearing influence over the militants.
They don't have the kind of clout.
Yes, the militants are subject to the authority of their leaders and not authority of their elders. Unlike what you have in the northern part of the country, where people are subject to the authority of the elders or the traditional institutions. That does not obtain so much in the southeast and south side part of the country. So the militants, having been radicalized, are not largely subject to the influence and authority of the elders the government is speaking with. So they must find the ways of engaging who these militants listen to, which is what the area government did. We must find that. So until we achieve that, you may not be able to stop the breaching, because it's only those that are leaders that have the authority to discipline them. Remember, these guys are also subject to some authority, and they're subject to some discipline. When they go against their leaders, the punishment could be very severe.
Okay, let's shed more light on this for you. Let's see the trend of Nigeria's inflation in the last 6 months. Inflation reached up to 15.6% in May, and that's about 1.90 points in excess of the previous month when it stood at 13.7%. In June, consumer prices surged by 16.5% year-on-year, following a 15.6% jump in May.
Now, figures came about above market expectations of 16.3% increase, mostly driven by a sharper rise in cost of food, housing and utilities. Now, moving to July, consumer prices jumped by 17.1% year-on-year compared to a market expectation of 17.2% rise. And looking at August, consumer prices rose by 17.6%, following a 17.1% gain in July.
And in September, inflation went up by 17.9%, following a 17.6% rise in August, in line with market expectations. And October shows the highest yet, reaching 18.3%. So Johnson, now Emefiele, the governor of the CBN, in saying that Nigeria is gradually coming out of recession, made reference to the strategic fiscal and monetary policies that, you know, the monetary authorities are putting in place. Educate us on some of these policies, you know, because I've heard experts like yourself say nothing is coming from government as far as fiscal policies are concerned, and the topsy-turvy, you know, policies coming from the monetary side seems to be what has put us here. So, well, shed more light on this for us.
Well, the way I would see it, we've seen a largely quiet fiscal intervention in the economy. You people were discussing about the 200,000 jobs. That would be obviously the first intervention we are going to see if it's well executed. The attempts to manage the economy have been left largely to the monetary authorities. And there are limits to the effectiveness of monetary tools, particularly where you have structural challenges. The monetary authorities, in order to manage the inflationary pressure, have come up with several monetary foreign exchange initiatives. Unfortunately, a lot of those initiatives have ended up creating additional panic into the economy and led to largely significant loss of confidence in the local currency and the flight to safety. And that is why you've seen the current exchange rate about parallel market about 460. Because the reality is that if you look at purchasing power parity, the dollar should not be exchanging for 460. But because there's also loss of confidence, if you even go back to the inflation rate you started, the inflation breached the single digit only in February. In January, inflation rate was 9.6%. In February, it moved to 11%.
All right, we'll come back to this briefly. Let's go on a break, and we come back to round off on the program. Stay with us. All right, we are still discussing the recession that's deepening in Nigeria, although the government officials have come to say that we are getting out of it gradually. We have in the studio the Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management, Johnson Chukwu, with us. He's a financial analyst. We've been looking at this. Now, Johnson, we've had some experts say that it will take about a year or two before we get out of the recession situation. Now, with all of these strategies government is putting in place, and even from the itemized points you were giving us earlier on, if government even follows through the way you're giving them, how long would it take before we really
begin to see signs?
Begin to see the impacts of all of these?
Okay, let me conclude what we were saying before I come back to this. You were talking of what the monetary and fiscal authorities have said, and said the monetary authority, the fiscal authority has been largely silent. A lot of activity we are seeing are basically from the monetary side. There's one thing the monetary authority have done very well, and that is the Development Finance Initiative they've engendered in agriculture, the Anchor Borrowers Program, that we're seeing that has led to an uptick in the production of crops. And that's the recovery we saw in agriculture of 4.54% was largely driven by agricultural production. So a lesson from that, which I mentioned earlier, is that you need to inject liquidity into the different sectors of the economy. If we do inject liquidity at relatively good yield, good cost, and manufacturers can borrow at single digit or lower double digits, the construction industry will borrow at single or lower double digits, the real estate sector and other sectors can borrow at those rates, then you're going to see liquidity flowing back into the economy. The economy. If that happens, my guess is that within 2 to 3 quarters, we should see a rebound. You see, what you are basically saying that instead of a contraction, we should see a growth. But you may see a low-level growth. But we must also address the issue of crude production. If we don't address the issue of crude production immediately, we must add a source for foreign currency to provide liquidity to these sectors that I just mentioned that have the capacity.
So would you agree with those who are saying that Nigeria needs to consider, selling off some of our joint venture assets, as this will improve our, forex earnings and actually reflect the economy?
Well, my concept of the JV scheme is actually completely a different story entirely, and I will tell you why. In the first place, under the JV arrangement, Nigeria does not have the capacity to meet its cash call obligations. So because we don't have the capacity to meet our cash call obligation, we constrain development, exploration, production, and development. So if you don't have the money to fund it, why don't we adopt an incorporated joint venture, which has been proposed under the Petroleum Industry Bill for the past 10 years and not passed into law. The success of Nigerian liquefied natural gas scheme is largely based on the structure of that organization, where there's no need to make calc calls. Because if you make calc calls on the federal government, these streams, now they are on stream 7, they wouldn't have seen the light of the day. So we need to move away from an unincorporated joint venture where the federal government make the JVs make cash calls and Nigeria cannot meet its cash call, to incorporated joint ventures where these companies can go to the international finance market and borrow on the strength of their balance sheets and invest in productive activities.
All right. Johnson Chukwu, thank you very much for coming this morning to give us a light into some of these economic situations. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It's all right.